In the annals of human history, there exists a trove of unsettling and often overlooked tales that veer into the shadows of our collective past. These dark historical facts, concealed beneath the surface of more conventional narratives, reveal the stark realities of human nature and the tumultuous journey of societies through time. From clandestine conspiracies to macabre practices, this exploration delves into 15 historical episodes that have eluded the spotlight but have left an indelible mark on the tapestry of our shared history. General Patton's nepotism got hundreds killed, captured or wounded. During the Sicilian campaign in World War II, General George S. Patton found himself in a heated controversy. He accused a soldier struggling with PTSD of cowardice while visiting a hospital. Shockingly, Patton not only verbally abused the soldier, but also physically assaulted him, even threatening to shoot him. This disgraceful behavior repeated a few days later with another soldier in a different hospital. The scandal could have cost Patton his position, but he managed to survive the fallout. Later, he distinguished himself in France and Germany a year after the incident. However, towards the end of the war, Patton got involved in an even more troubling, yet less known controversy that resulted in the deaths of many soldiers. In March 1945, he ordered Task Force Baum, consisting of 314 men, 16 tanks, and numerous vehicles, to infiltrate 50 miles behind German lines. Their mission, to liberate a POW camp where Patton's son-in-law was held. Unfortunately, only a few members returned from this mission intended to save Patton's relatives. Ancient Roman humor could be pretty mean. Back in ancient times, people weren't just like us without smartphones and electricity. They lived in a whole different world with different ways of thinking and moral beliefs. If we want to understand why they found entertainment in watching gruesome events at places like the Colosseum in Rome, we have to consider their unique perspectives. The Colosseum, before it stopped hosting gladiator contests and public executions, witnessed the loss of up to 1 million lives, not to mention the countless animals slaughtered for the audience's pleasure. To ancient Romans, witnessing large-scale violence was considered thrilling and entertaining. Their sense of humor was quite different too. Take the example of the Great Fire during Nero's reign. While many Romans were horrified by the widespread misery, some Christians actually celebrated, believing it signaled the end of days and Jesus' return. This made other Romans suspicious, thinking the Christians might have started the fire. Nero, wanting to make an example, gathered the Christians and staged a spectacle. The shocking part of the show involved covering some Christians in pitch and setting them on fire, turning them into human torches. Roman spectators found this punishment amusing and fitting, considering the Christians were accused of arson and had now become torches themselves. It might seem harsh to us today, but it was the norm for them in their very different world. Christians, specifically, were not fed to lions in the Colosseum. For a long time, people believed a story about early Christians facing a grim fate in Rome's Colosseum. The image of Christians being thrown to lions was so ingrained in art and culture that it seemed like the Colosseum's big cats had a steady diet of Christian martyrs. However, there's no historical proof that such events actually happened. As mentioned earlier, Roman authorities were indeed harsh towards some Christians, handing out brutal punishments. Official persecutions against Christians did occur, but there's no solid evidence that they were ever thrown to lions in the Colosseum. The stories we've heard about this were popularized much later in what's known as the Acts of the Martyrs. These accounts, detailing the sufferings of early Christians, were put together after Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. While historians view these accounts with skepticism, they did play a surprising role in history. The secret to Roman conquest: success, stubbornness. The ancient Romans didn't become rulers of a vast empire because they were military geniuses. Instead, it was their strict discipline, determination, and persistent attitude in warfare that made them successful. Even when facing enemies with brilliant leaders, like the Carthaginians led by the remarkable Hannibal, the Romans managed to conquer them. An example of this relentless approach was the Roman conquest of the Iberian Peninsula, which started in 220 BC and took over 2 centuries to complete, finishing in 19 BC. This ability to gather resources, pursue enemies tirelessly, and stick to their goal until the enemy gave in was a key strength of the Roman state. During the social war between Rome and its Italian allies from 91 to 88 BC, the Samnites, who had fiercely resisted Roman rule for centuries, captured and fortified the town of Nola. In 91 BC, a Roman army tried to reclaim it, but negotiations failed. As the Romans withdrew, the Samnite leader confidently declared that Nola would never surrender. The town's defenses were too strong to storm, and they had enough supplies to withstand a siege for 10 years. The Roman commander's response to this boast was truly remarkable. The CIA defeated rebels in the Philippines by pretending to be vampires. Back in the Cold War, the Philippines was friends with the United States. However, there were some communist rebels, the People's Army, causing trouble in the Hukbalahap rebellion. To deal with them, the CIA stepped in and came up with a rather creepy plan. They decided to use the local legend of the aswang, a creature that's like a blood-sucking vampire. Since most of these rebels lived in the countryside and still believed in these legends, the CIA captured one of them. They left 2 puncture wounds on his neck and hung his body upside down to make it look like the work of the mythical aswang. They left his body on a trail for his comrades to find. Surprisingly, this scare tactic worked really well. The rebels got spooked and abandoned their camp right away. The CIA didn't stop there. They used more psychological tricks to frighten the rebels, and it worked. In 1954, the rebels eventually gave up and surrendered. Ancient Greece's elite homosexual warriors. In the old days of ancient Greece, the armies of city-states were made up of regular folks who had day jobs but would grab their weapons when war came knocking. Now the Spartans did things a bit differently. They had a bunch of slaves handle most of the work, so Spartan citizens, about 1/10 of the whole population, could focus all their time on getting really good at fighting. This turned them into a super disciplined and tough group, especially in their elite Spartan phalanx. So when Thebes decided to take on Sparta in the 4th century BC, it was a big challenge. Luckily for Thebes, they had smart military leaders like Epaminondas, who died in 362 BC, and Pelopidas, who died in 364 BC. These guys came up with clever tactics that helped them beat the Spartans, like in the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC. Even though the Thebans had fewer soldiers, Epaminondas did something clever. He made the left side of the Theban group super thick with 50 soldiers in a row. This created a strong force against the Spartan right side, which had the usual 8 to 12 soldiers in a row. The Thebans smashed through, and leading the charge was the Sacred Band, a special group of 150 pairs of gay lovers. Crassus had his own private firefighters and manipulated fire victims. In the time of Crassus in Rome, the city had a lot of buildings that caught fire easily, and fires happened a lot. Strangely, there were no public firefighters, so Crassus came up with a plan. He made his own private firefighting team using his slaves. Whenever a fire broke out, he and his team would rush over. Then, right there at the scene, he would make offers to buy the burning building or others nearby at really cheap prices. The owners, worried about losing everything to the flames, often agreed to sell. This tricky strategy made Crassus the biggest property owner in Rome. By the 70s BC, he was the wealthiest guy in the whole city. He used this wealth to gain power and joined the first triumvirate with Caesar and Pompey to share control of the Roman Republic. But Crassus didn't just want to be rich. In today's world, super-rich folks build rockets and go to space. Well, back then, rich Romans like Crassus raised armies and invaded other countries. Crassus wanted the military glory his buddies Caesar and Pompey had. However, the only big military thing he had done was beat Spartacus's slave rebellion, which wasn't as impressive as what his friends had achieved. To make a name for himself, Crassus decided to invade Parthia, a new kingdom ruling over Persia and Mesopotamia. It seemed like an easy win, given that Pompey had defeated other eastern kingdoms just a decade earlier, Unfortunately, things didn't go well for Crassus. The Persians won a war against the Egyptians because they used cats as a shield. In ancient Egypt, people had a special fondness for cats because they were linked to the goddess Bastet. Egyptians in general had a deep respect for all living things, and many of them chose to eat a diet that didn't include much meat. Here's an interesting fact. If you happen to harm a cat in ancient Egypt, it could lead to a death sentence. Now, during a big showdown called the Battle of Pelusium in 525 BCE, Pharaoh Psammetichus III faced off against the Persian king Cambyses II. The Persians knew about the Egyptians' love for cats, and they used that knowledge cleverly. The Persian king insisted that the image of Bastet, the cat-associated goddess, should be painted on his soldiers' shields. Historical records mention that the Persians placed dogs, sheep, cats, ibises, and other animals dear to the Egyptians in front of their front line. In the end, the Persians won the battle. To add insult to injury, they threw captured cats at the Egyptian soldiers who surrendered, just to make fun of them. It was a not-so-friendly way of mocking the Egyptians and their love for these feline companions. Bobby Leach survived a ride down Niagara Falls, but died, slipping on an orange peel. Since 1850, over 5,000 people have lost their lives going over Niagara Falls, whether by choice in a tragic act, seeking adventure without understanding the danger, or attempting risky stunts for publicity. So when someone like Bobby Leach successfully went over Niagara Falls and lived, it became a notable event in history. In 1911, Bobby Leach accomplished this daring feat inside a barrel he had specially built for the journey. When he emerged from the falls, he had some bruises and was bleeding, but overall he was okay. Ironically, a few years later he had a mishap, slipping on an orange peel, and injured his leg. The injury got infected and had to be amputated. Unfortunately, something went wrong during the surgery, and Bobby Leach passed away just a few days later. America missed out on the metric system due to the misfortunes of a French scientist. In the 18th century, there was a chance that the United States might have embraced the metric system if not for a string of misfortunes that happened to a Frenchman named Joseph Dombey. Sent to America in 1794, Dombey aimed to assist in overhauling the British imperial system of measurements that the Americans were using. He brought along copper models for the newly proposed meter and kilometer, intending to present them to Congress. Unfortunately, his journey took a wrong turn when his ship ended up in Guadeloupe, where French royalists imprisoned him. After his release, Dombey faced another setback, as he was captured by pirates who not only stole his measurement prototypes, but also demanded a ransom for his freedom. Tragically, while in captivity, Dombey succumbed to a fever and passed away. This unfortunate turn of events meant that America missed the opportunity to adopt the metric system. The ancient pirate kingdom in Rome's backyard. In the 3rd century BC, the Illyrian tribes living along the coasts of what is now Croatia and Albania took up piracy as a way of life. Back in the classical period, Athens and Rhodes, with their strong navies, had kept the Greek waters relatively safe, and even Philip II of Macedon and his son Alexander the Great followed suit. However, when Alexander passed away, his successors were more focused on fighting among themselves, leaving the Illyrians unchecked. Taking advantage of their coastlines' hidden inlets, the Illyrians embraced piracy. This eventually brought them into conflict with the expanding Roman Republic. After Rome's victory over Carthage in the First Punic War, 264–241 BC, Rome became a significant naval power in the Mediterranean. But across the Adriatic Sea, the Illyrians, particularly the Ardeaei tribe led by Queen Teuta, reigned 231–227 BC, posed a challenge to Rome's newfound dominance. Teuta, who took over the kingdom after her husband's death, continued his expansionist policies, pushing the borders deeper into the Balkans and supporting the piratical activities of her subjects. The pirate queen who gave the Romans fits Rome's dispute with Queen Teuta started when her pirates attacked and looted Roman ships. When the Roman merchants reported this to the Senate, They initially tried to resolve the issue through talks. 2 envoys were sent to Queen Tutor's court to voice the complaints. Tutor, however, argued that piracy was legal among the Illyrians and that her government had no right to interfere with their citizens' private ventures. The Roman diplomats warned that if Illyrian laws weren't changed, Rome would have to intervene. Tutor's response was far from diplomatic. She ordered 1 envoy killed and the other imprisoned. This act of aggression led the Romans to declare war in 229 BC. They sent a fleet of 200 warships to disrupt the Illyrians at sea, while an army of 20,000 soldiers and cavalry crossed the Adriatic to challenge Tutor's kingdom on land. Queen Tutor fiercely resisted, causing considerable trouble for the Romans. However, the might of Rome proved too much for her kingdom. In 227 BC, Tutor had to surrender and sign a humiliating peace treaty. Although she retained her throne, she became a Roman vassal, obligated to pay an annual tribute. Her realm was significantly reduced, losing a substantial portion of its territory. The Brooklyn Bridge's inauspicious opening. The Brooklyn Bridge, linking Brooklyn and Manhattan over the East River, opened its doors in 1883 and remains a New York City landmark even after almost 150 years. It's recognized as the world's first steel wire suspension bridge and a National Historic Landmark. The construction of this iconic bridge began in 1869 and took 14 years to complete, showcasing the challenges faced by workers in poorly ventilated chambers, resulting in health issues like decompression sickness and paralysis. Despite the difficulties, the bridge opened to the public on May 24, 1883, with much excitement, celebrated with fireworks and civic pride. However, just 6 days later, disaster struck on May 30th, a holiday that drew crowds to the newly opened Brooklyn Bridge's promenade, NYC's highest vantage point at the time. A bottleneck formed on the Manhattan side, leading to chaos as the tightly packed crowd moved forward. A short flight of stairs caused some to fall, triggering panic and a stampede. In the ensuing chaos, 12 people lost their lives and hundreds suffered injuries. Investigations later revealed the disaster was due to a lack of police presence to manage the crowds and keep them moving. From that point on, it became standard practice to have police on the bridge to ensure a smooth flow of people. It took 60 million years for a bacteria to develop that could decompose trees. Nowadays, when trees fall, it takes about 46 to 124 years for them to break down. We humans find various uses for fallen trees, like building houses or using the wood for burning. But what about millions of years ago when trees fell in the forest? Well, it turns out it took a whopping 60 million years for bacteria to evolve and develop the ability to decompose trees. Back in those ancient times, trees looked quite different from today's trees. They were tall, skinny, and had a peculiar appearance. Their root systems were shallow, making them prone to falling over. So, for tens of millions of years, these trees just kept falling on top of each other without breaking down. This process is how we ended up with coal, which is often referred to as a fossil fuel. It's also why coal is a finite resource. It took a very long time for bacteria to evolve and start breaking down those ancient trees into what we now use as coal. Sharks are older than trees and the rings of Saturn. Sharks are an ancient bunch, sticking around for an impressive 400 million years. To give you an idea of how mind-blowing that is, the first tree we know of is only 385 million years old. And believe it or not, the rings of Saturn formed a mere 100 million years ago. Now things get even wilder. About 20 million years ago, sharks faced a real crisis. Out of the blue, their population plummeted by a whopping 90%, putting them on the brink of extinction. During this rough patch, Earth said goodbye to 70% of its shark species. Imagine if they had gone extinct altogether. We'd be talking about sharks like we do about dinosaurs, as these incredible creatures from the past that we can hardly picture living alongside humans. Thanks for watching the video, and if you found it informative, please like and subscribe to Time Capsule for similar content. We look forward to sharing more knowledge with you in the future. Until then, take care.